All right, this is how to compose music in 5 easy steps. Easy, huh? Well, yeah. I'm going to take you through each one of these kind of step by step. And maybe the advantage of the video is that you can go back and kind of watch things over and over again if that's helpful. So if you have the assignment sheet in front of you, step 1, it says, is to pick a set of chord changes and write them on your lead sheet. So a lead sheet is basically just sheet music. Usually a lead sheet includes a notation for the chords, the harmony, as well as the melody. We've talked about harmony a little bit, and what you see in step number 1 is chords written as Roman numerals. So I will draw this on the board as I've done many times, and then I'll show you on the keyboard. So if I start with that C major scale, and if I create triads, which would be 3 notes stacked on top of each other at the interval of a third, then we get a series of, and I'm going to leave these open, series.
TV programs matching open door, classic US Open.
Thank you, Siri.
The Open Mind.
Thank you, Siri. All right. All right, let me try this again. So I'm going to leave the notes open, but the root of each triad is going to be filled in. So in the same way that we can number a scale, we can also number the chords that come from a key. So this is 1, 2, and so forth. You get the idea. The last one is really the same as the first, so we just call it a 1 chord. Again. Now, you might notice that some of these are written as uppercase Roman numerals and some of them are written as lowercase Roman numerals, and that's because each one of these chords is a different chord type. And in our discussion of harmony, we basically have discussed 4 different chord types: major, minor, diminished, and augmented. Inside of a major scale or major key, we only get 3 of those naturally. So the uppercase Roman numerals indicate major, 1, 4, 5, and 8, and the lowercase are the minor chords. And then the 7 in this case is something a little bit different. It's a diminished chord. So that's what they look like. Here's what they sound like. Here's 1, which is major, 2, minor, 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, 7 is diminished, and then we're back up to 1 again, or 8. Okay, that's it. Not a big deal. So while I'm here and on the keyboard, I would just like to point out that to play these chords, it's actually pretty simple. If I start with my thumb on a C, and I just play every other note, like that, then we end up with a C triad. So I'm using every other finger. If I lay all my fingers on the keyboard, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just play 1, 3, 5, then I'm playing a triad. And in the key of C, no flats or sharps, I can literally just move my hand to the next note and play the next chord, like that. So my hand doesn't really change at all. I'm just making what we lovingly refer to as the claw. And I just move it up. It's really pretty simple. So on this chart here, the name of the bottom note becomes the name of the chord. So in the example of the first one, number 1, the bottom note's a C, so we call that a C chord. The next one's a D, so this is a D chord. The only thing we have to add is a suffix to the chord type to tell people what kind of a chord it is. And again, if we're talking about triads, there's only 4: major, minor, diminished, and augmented. So looking at the Roman numerals, it kind of gives us a hint again. All of these are major and the little ones are minor. And I'm going to show you some chord symbol notation that I prefer. There's lots of different ways to do it, but for a minor chord, I usually write the name of the chord, in this case D, and then I just put a little minus sign, like that. Hopefully that's showing up on the camera. And the same thing for E. E minor, A minor. Sometimes people will use like a big M for major and a little m for minor, and to me that's a little bit confusing because maybe people would argue about whether something is big or little. So the minus sign is pretty good. On the diminished chord, just like I did here after the 7, I'm just going to put a little degree mark. Hope that's showing up okay. And that tells us that it's a B diminished chord. Okay, so the top here, we call that chord symbol notation. The bottom is more like chord analysis, something you would do in a music theory class, but typically, at least in a contemporary or popular music context, the ones on the top are the more commonly used chord symbol notations. So, step number 1, pick a set of chord changes and write them on your lead sheet. Okay, now I've shown you where the chords come from, and I've shown you how to write the chord symbols. Let's pretend that this is going to become our lead sheet, and I'll just do like a couple bars. So, because this assignment is 16 measures long, you'll probably divide up the music into, maybe 4 measures on a line. Something kind of like that. And we'll put the melody, on the staff. We're going to notate the melody normally. And we're going to put the chord symbols up above. So in order to put them up there, we have to just choose. So if you look at the project sheet, I've given you some options for chord changes that you can just throw a dart and pick whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. Now, some of them will kind of resolve back to the 1 chord, which is kind of a nice way to finish a line. So if something ends on maybe like a 5-7 or a 4 or some other chord, maybe it's not the best one to be sort of the last phrase. It's probably better to end on a progression where it kind of comes to rest on the 1 chord. We like to go back home again. But let me, just for the sake of keeping this pretty simple, use number 1, which is 1, 4, 5, 7, 1. And so if I pick number 1, and then I go down on the little assignment sheet, it shows you the chord symbol notation for each chord relative to its number. So the 1 in the key of C is going to be C. It's really simple. So I'm just going to write a C up above the chart. And I'm doing it at the beginning of the measure. Measure number 2 is going to be the 4 chord. That's F. F major. The 3rd chord is a 5-7. Well, the 5 is G, and the 7 refers to an extra note. Oh, my marker. And the extra note looks like this. Normally, if I were to write the G chord, the G major chord, it would be a root, a 3rd and a 5th, G, B, D, like that. So that's the root, that's the 3rd, this is the 5th. Well, it's very common on the 5 chord in any key, which we call the dominant chord. It's very common to add one more note up on the top. Right there. And you can imagine if we keep going up, root, 3rd, 5th, the next one would be the 7th. And we call that chord the dominant chord. It's a very powerful chord, and it very much wants us to go back to 1, which is, whoops, C. Back to C. Let me play it for you. here's 1, C, to 4, F. Here's the 5, 7. There's the 7. And then back to 1. So in my right hand, I'm just playing triads. And in my left hand, I'm just playing whatever the root of the chord is. In the first case, it's a C, right? I'm just playing that down an octave. So here's a lower C. So I'm kind of reinforcing the root of the chord by playing that same note in the bass. That's it. So on the staff, let's just imagine that we're in 4/4 time. If we were only playing the chords, you know, it might look something like that. So we're just playing the C chord for 4 beats, then the F chord for 4 beats. You get the idea. So that's literally it for step number 1. You just pick a chord progression, write the chord symbols up above. You actually probably don't want to do this bit here. I was just trying to demonstrate the number of beats that they will play. We're going to do something else down here. All right, so step number 1, just pick a chord progression, and you can mix and match. You could do one of them over and over again, like the 1, 4, 5, 1, or you could combine, and you could do like number 5 and number whatever. Again, the whole thing is going to be 16 measures long. So you can put together sets of chord changes, and you know, you almost can't make a mistake. The only thing, I would suggest is when you get to the end of a phrase, maybe at the end of 8 bars, certainly the end of 16 bars, it's good to come back to 1, back to C if you're in the key of C. Okay? Other than that, you really can't screw it up. And you could even make up your own chord progression if you want to. Oh, one more thing I'll say is that in some cases, the chord progression might have 2 chords inside of a measure. So let me just give you an example of that. This is not something that's on the chart, but I'm going to write as if it was 1, 4, and then maybe 2, 5, 7, 1. All right. So if it says 2, something else, I have 2 chords inside of one measure. So what that looks like is right here, where I have C for one measure, F for one measure, D minor, G7, C. I'll play it and you'll hear it. C, 2, 3, 4, F, 2, 3, 4, D. Right, so it goes by quicker. I'm playing 2 chords inside of one measure right there. Okay, that's step number 1.